Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Great. Thank you. We're having a little bit of technical issues here on my end, so please bear with me. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Ask Me Anything event. My name is Seema Chaudhry, and I will be one of your co-hosts for this afternoon. Bonjour à tous. Ça me fait grand plaisir d'être ici entre vous aujourd'hui.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be with you here today.
Dans un esprit de profonde reconnaissance, nous sommes ici pour aller vers une inclusion significative et compréhensive dans notre travail et dans nos vies. J'aimerais commencer par souligner que les terres sur lesquelles nous sommes rassemblés, que je suis rassemblée, que je vis et travaille, font partie du territoire traditionnel non cédé des peuples Anishinaabe algonquins. I'd like to ask everyone here to commit to learning more about the first peoples of our land and their history. I'd like to challenge each of you to start a tradition of learning, assisting, and acknowledging the harms of the present and the past of with your family, colleagues, and your community. You can start by learning what territory you are on and how to pronounce it, and how to make learning and celebrating our first peoples part of an ongoing journey. I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I think all of us in our own ways are trying to find a silver lining, in what has been undoubtedly a difficult time for all of us. And so maybe for you, that means trying something new or learning a new skill. So for those of us part of the Ask Me Anything events team, this has meant, finding more and more ways to become more inclusive in the workplace and try to create more inclusive cultures within our workspaces, recognizing that everyone has a right to feel safe and have the basic necessities to survive is a human right. So on behalf of the entire production team over at Ask Me Anything, we would like to thank you for showing up here today, because learning is good for your mental health. Today on the Ask Me Anything stage, we continue with more courageous conversations as we level up the public service. We're trying to kind of, ensure that we're creating those inclusive cultures within our workspaces by taking an opportunity today, especially to learn about Sikh culture and the heritage and how it facilitates the connection between community and Sikhs, as well as the past and the present contributions of Sikhs in building a better and more inclusive Canada. We are thrilled to have with us today 3 outstanding public servants to the Ask Me Anything stage, who will share with us their stories and their reflections, demonstrating personal, generational, and community strengths, while discussing the strong roots that compel Sikhs' efforts to advance inclusion, justice, and equality. These Ask Me Anything events provide you with an opportunity to increase perspective, to learn from lived experiences of individuals who are bravely sharing their experiences, to help educate and move the public service towards a culture where equity is embedded. I apologize, I keep reading from my screen. I'm using my phone today, so I'm trying to multitask. So please bear with me and be a little patient. Bonjour encore à tous. My name is Seema Chaudhry, and I'd like to share some of my layers with you. Je travaille comme conseillère civile du secrétariat de la lutte contre le racisme, qui fait partie de le ministère de la Défense nationale. J'ai passé plus que 18 ans dans la fonction publique, and I've worked in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for a number of years. I'm a strong advocate for promoting open dialogue and conversation, and turning them into meaningful action in advancing equity and inclusion within our defense team. I am a second-generation Canadian of Bangladeshi heritage, born and raised in Ottawa. My parents immigrated to Canada in the early 70s to complete their studies, and then they settled their roots here in our nation's capital. I identify as she and her. I am also a racialized Muslim woman, which includes being a mom and a partner. My husband, my son, and I love travel and adventure. We've been very lucky to travel all over the world, and hoping now that things are settling down with COVID a little bit, we hope to do that again. I grew up speaking Bengali at home, learning French at school, and on the weekends I attended Arabic classes. So I am truly privileged to have had all of these opportunities shape who I am today. Growing up in Ottawa, my family was part of a small but growing Bangladeshi community. Our home was always like Ellis Island because we had so many newcomers, coming through, passing through. It was a revolving door. We'd have new family, friends, extended family, and people we didn't even know come stay with us often. And that's only because my father would say, if we are in a position to help others, then we will. It wasn't an option. We always did that. And so it's nice to have that feeling where, if you are in a position to lead, that's when you lift others, right? And so my roots are pretty much in community building, and I appreciate that because it comes from my parents. So enough about me. I was a little nervous, so I'm a little shaky. So I will continue on. I'd like to thank our speakers today for being so courageous and joining us today and standing up and sharing pieces of themselves with all of you, our audience. I'd also like to acknowledge that today's conversations may be a little difficult to hear, or cause triggers. So please, as always, if you or your family members would like to speak to a counselor or need some immediate support, please call the Employee Assistant Program. Veuillez appeler le programme d'aide aux employés. Yeah, enough about me. I'm going to turn it to my co-host Amneet and ask her to introduce herself.
Thanks, Seema. I'm very happy to be here co-hosting with you today. Hello, everyone. Welcome, bienvenue. My name is Amneet Lit, and my pronouns are she, her, and elle. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Semiahmoo, Katsi, Tsawwassen, and Kwantlen First Nations. And this area is presently known as Delta, British Columbia. I acknowledge and recognize that I am a settler here, and coming from a family that has deep roots in farming communities in Punjab, India, I would like to express gratitude for the peoples who are the caretakers of this land. I am privileged to have the opportunity to live and work here and call the West Coast my home. And I'm committed to learning about Indigenous cultures and histories and the ongoing legacy of colonialism and continuing to reflect on how I can play a part in reconciliation. Now for my layers. I work as an economist and a policy analyst at the Department of Finance, where I conduct research on tax policy issues. I'm also a member of the Anti-Racism Committee at my department, where we work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. I've been working for the federal government for almost 3 years now. And one thing I'd like to share about my family history is that both my Nanaji, who is my maternal grandfather, and my mother worked for the Indian central government before they came to Canada. And my younger brother works for the RCMP. So being a public servant is something that runs in my family and has run in my family for the past 3 generations. I am a second generation Punjabi and Sikh woman, and much of my life has been shaped by the immigrant experience and growing up in the South Asian diaspora. My family on both sides has roots in Punjab, India. So my dad came to Canada from a small village outside the city of Ludhiana, and my mom is from the capital, Delhi. I was born and raised on the West Coast, and I grew up in the communities of Delta and Surrey, which have very large South Asian and immigrant populations. Along with being a daughter and a granddaughter, I'm also the eldest child in my family and an older sister to 3 younger siblings. I consider myself fortunate because I grew up immersed in Punjabi culture and the Sikh faith. But like many other kids and young adults who I grew up with, I found myself trying to balance these aspects of my identity with fitting into Western culture and kind of trying to figure out how to balance the two. So growing up, we spoke Punjabi at home. We celebrated festivals such as Diwali and Rakhi and Vaisakhi, which just passed last week. And we went to the Gurdwara or the temple every weekend. My parents raised me and my siblings with values that are core to Sikhism. So these include being of service to your community, striving for inclusion and equality, and the value of hard work and earning an honest living. These are values that connect me with my ancestors, and they continue to shape my worldview and how I live my life. One last layer I'd like to share with you is that I am a learner and a proponent of lifelong learning. And it's only recently that I've started to dive deeper into the history of the Sikh community and especially our contributions to Canadian society, some of which we'll be hearing about today. And being a learner actually has a deeper meaning and connection for me because the word Sikh actually translates to student or learner or disciple in English. So I'm really excited to be here today in celebration of Sikh heritage and culture. And I can't wait to hear from our three incredible panelists and learn more about their journeys and experiences and reflections. So as we proceed with today's Ask Me Anything, I welcome you to reflect on your layers and think about how we can make our workplaces a safe space for you to share your layers and for others to be more curious and brave. Before continuing, I just want to mention a few housekeeping items. La série d'aujourd'hui sera enregistrée et disponible après l'événement. We also have a GC Collab wiki page that you can access with the resource guide, a recording of today's event, as well as all the previous Ask Me Anything events. We encourage everyone here to keep the courageous conversations going in our workplaces and to use the questions in the hashtag AMA Challenge Guide to spark dialogue and share what you have learned together. Si vous avez des questions pendant l'événement, nous avons un modérateur qui peut vous aider via la section questions-réponses. We also have simultaneous translation in English and French, and you can check out the chat for more information. Back to you, Seema.
Merci, Amneet. That was great. It's always nice to learn about new people through these AMA experiences. So I'm really excited to be doing this with you, and I'm really excited to meet our speakers. So let's start off with Jody Ryan. Can you introduce yourself, Jody?
Sure, thank you. I think you folks can hear me. I'm nervous and also excited, and I share that because of my 18 plus years of being a public servant. This is the first time that I am representing my ancestors and my heritage as it relates to being Punjabi as well as being raised in the Sikh faith. My given name is Hajot. It means divine light. And like many individuals that I know of, my name in the first part, Har, comes from our Granth Sahib. Our Guru Granth Sahib is our holy scripture. And in our culture, when a child is born, the name is picked from the Guru Granth Sahib. A page is turned, and the first sort of phrase that's uttered, if it starts with a, in my case, started with a Har, that's how my name became Harjot. Jot is light, and hence the literal translation is divine light. I'm speaking to you folks from today from, well, two things. One, I was born and raised on the stolen ancestral traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, otherwise known as Vancouver or East Vancouver. Home now and work is in 4 different nations: the Katsi, the Kwantlen, the Semiahmoo, and the Tsawwassen nations. I quite deliberately share both because normally when I say I'm first generation, I'll usually say British Columbia and then I'll say Vancouver. As Amneet shared in terms of her desires and hopes for her contribution for reconciliation, I share the same, and part of that is educating myself in terms of the language and the land that I'm privileged really to live and breathe from every day. My layers are many when I think about social justice and language such as intersectionality. My pronouns are she and her. I identify as a cis woman, brown and on the lighter side of brown. I'm a mom. I'm an individual who lives with mental health in the form of an anxiety disorder. And normally when people ask me to identify and or introduce myself, I always start with human. And I mean that quite deliberately. And I'm only now, as I educate myself in terms of my ancestry and Sikhism and being Punjabi, that the idea of humanity and equality comes from my DNA. It's in my ancestral roots. It flows through my veins. A little bit more about me in terms of my family and my home. My father was sponsored by his Masi, that is aunt, his mom's sister, and my parents were married in Yuba City, California. My nonke, which is my mom's side of the family, are all farmers and immigrated to Yuba City, and that's where my parents were married. In terms of what I do, I first and foremost am a mom. I am a public servant and currently a free agent. I've been with the public service for 18 plus years. And part of my story that I'll share a little bit later includes the awakening of regenerating myself. And it includes actually launching my own consulting company through Hey Humantis, which is a consulting company that I started about 3 years ago. I'm trying to bring humanity back into the workplace. And I do that through consulting, training, and coaching, as well as a podcast that I air and have fabulous guests who I call intentifiers. And I'm in the middle of writing a book. I'll stop there in terms of my share at this point. Thank you.
That's amazing, Jody. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we'll move over to our next panelist. Over to you, Captain Sarabjot Anand. I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Thanks for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Captain Sarabjot Anand, and I'm a systems design engineer at the Radar and Communication Systems, based out of Ottawa, also known as R&CS within DGAEPM. So lots of acronyms there, but belong to the Air Force. I'm based out of Ottawa, working as a computer scientist, engineer, IT field. So a bit about me. I was born and raised in India, immigrated to Canada in 2004. I graduated Royal Military College of Canada. That's where I did my undergrad in 2015. And I'm a diversity and inclusion advisor to the Director General for my organization, Brigadier General Rodgers. Outside my primary and secondary roles, I am helping Defense Research and Development Canada, also known as DRDC, develop gas mask extensions for the Canadian Armed Forces. And these extensions would accommodate beards, turbans, hijabs, etc., so that Canadian Armed Forces soldiers can still be in a CBRN gas threat environment and not be forced to sacrifice their religious beliefs and practices, such as maintaining a beard or having a turban. So some of my layers include, as I stated, I'm an immigrant, I'm an Indian, a proud turban-wearing Sikh, as you can see. I do speak 5 languages, and I'm sure so do many of the panelists here. And I was the first ever turbaned officer to ever graduate from the Royal Military College of Canada, since the college was founded in 1876. So that's just putting a time perspective on, that's like 10 years after Confederation. Canada was founded, college was created, the university, and in 2015, I'm the first ever to graduate. So all my layers that I've described have shaped me into who I am today. And that's me in a nutshell. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing. We'll pass the baton on to Iman. You're the last but not least. Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis très contente d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je m'appelle Iman et je vous parle du territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. Je travaille comme analyste au ministère des Finances et j'ai rejoint le ministère il y a 3 ans après avoir fini ma maîtrise en relations internationales à l'Université de Cambridge. Je fais partie du comité de lutte contre le racisme à Finance et l'année dernière, j'ai travaillé avec Amrit et nos autres collègues pour célébrer le mois du patrimoine Sikh au ministère. Alors, je vais partager quelques couches de mon identité avec vous. Premièrement, je suis une Canadienne sikh. Mes grands-parents paternels ont immigré du Punjab à Colombie-Britannique dans les années 1970. Et du côté de ma mère, la famille a immigré au Canada de Hong Kong et ils font partie d'une longue histoire des Sikhs qui vivent là-bas. Pour ma part, je suis née à Toronto et j'ai grandi à Victoria et à Ottawa. Je suis aussi une artiste et musicienne. J'aime dessiner et je joue la guitare. Je suis polyglotte comme Sarabjot. Je parle anglais, français, punjabi et hindi et j'ai étudié le cantonais, l'espagnol et l'arabe. Et finalement, je suis une apprenante. J'aime apprendre de nouvelles choses, que ce soit les langues, les instruments, les cultures. Et c'est vraiment dans cet esprit que je suis ici pour partager mes expériences avec vous en tant que Sikh et fonctionnaire et d'apprendre quelque chose de nouveau de notre discussion. Merci.
Thank you very much to our panelists for sharing your, for bringing your authentic selves and sharing all of your layers with us today and this afternoon. We're looking forward to the conversation. I just wanted to mention to our audience, you can use the chat feature at any time to ask us any questions. And we do have people behind the scenes who will be monitoring that, and then we can go through the series of questions from the audience and we can fire them off to the panelists at any time. But without further ado, I guess we'll get started. So we'll start with the first question, and I'll fire this off to each of you. So the first question is, what makes you most proud of your Sikh identity? I think I will ask Iman, you can go ahead first. And then we'll pass it to Captain Anand and then Jody.
Alors pour moi, ce qui me rend le plus fière de mon identité sikh, c'est l'état d'esprit courageux et sans peur et la responsabilité de lutter pour la justice sociale. Ceci est une partie fondamentale de la philosophie sikh et si vous lisez les écritures sikh, vous trouveriez beaucoup d'emphase sur ces valeurs. Et si on regarde l'histoire des Sikhs, il y a plusieurs exemples où les Sikhs ont démontré ces valeurs. Et je vais juste partager quelques exemples de l'histoire canadienne avec vous. Alors, quelque chose que peut-être vous ne savez pas, c'est que les soldats Sikhs ont servi le Canada pendant les 2 guerres mondiales. Aussi, dans les années 1930 et 1940, les Sikhs ont participé activement à la lutte pour le droit de vote légal qui a été accordé au Sud asiatique en 1947. Plus récemment, des organisations humanitaires sikhs comme le Khalsa Aid ont voyagé aux zones de conflit pour servir les repas et aider les réfugiés, comme en Irak et Syrie, et maintenant en Pologne pour aider les réfugiés ukrainiens. Et des communautés sikhs de partout au Canada ont participé aux manifestations de Black Lives Matter et pour Truth and Reconciliation aussi. So these examples really speak to the Sikh philosophy of being fearless and standing up for those facing injustices. On a personal level, I think for everyone, we face a lot of these situations all the time, you know, when we have to do something outside of our comfort zone or we witness something and have to make a decision about whether to be a bystander or to speak up. And for me, when I'm faced with those situations, I really do feel a sense of strength that I can also be courageous because I know that I'm coming from a long line of fearless people. And so that's something I'm really proud of, but also something that makes me feel very empowered.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Iman, for sharing. We'll pass the baton to Captain Anand. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what makes you most proud of your Sikh identity.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know the panelists are probably going to talk about Sikh beliefs, so I'm going to try to take a different spin on this. I would say my turban is what makes me most proud of my Sikh identity in the literal form, the identity, right? So Sikhs regard their turban as a gift by the gurus, right? We had 10 gurus, and the meaning is deeply personal about the turban. So if we backtrack in history, in the South Asian culture, wearing a turban typically indicated one's social status, right? So back in the days, kings, rulers, they wore turbans. So the Sikh gurus, the 10 gurus that we had, part of our Sikh faith, they adopted the turban in part to remind the Sikhs that all humans are sovereign, they're royal, and ultimately they're equal, right? They were killing the social status of the rich and the poor, right? The average Joe Blow versus the king and the ruler. And they were saying everyone is equal. And that was the purpose behind the turban. So I'm really proud of that. So when I first started Royal Military College back in, when was it, August 2011, I was distraught when my staff approached me and said, hey, we have no idea what you're going to be wearing as your headdress as part of the RMC uniforms. Although the Canadian Armed Forces has a dress regulation for turbans in uniform, so this is the combat's Canadian Armed Forces uniform. There was already a dress standard for this. But when I attended RMC had their own uniforms, but they had zero mention of turbans as part of their regulations. No fault to their own. They weren't expecting a Sikh officer cadet to ever join because they hadn't faced it in the history of the college, right? So when I showed up in 2011, I was glad they were accommodating. They were willing to help, but the regulation didn't exist. So I kind of made it my own goal to ensure that, pave the path for the future Sikh officers coming through this institution so they don't face the same hurdles I did. So I, along with a few other Sikh officers that joined during my time, we helped develop and implement a bilingual turban standard as part of the dress regulations because it is a military institution and you can't expect the nation to be diverse when your military institution is not diverse, right? So this is where my journey for diversity and inclusion really started. So most definitely proud to be a Sikh and proud of my turban. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Captain Anand, for sharing that. This is just a prime example of when we are in a position of privilege. We have to use all of those avenues that we have to kind of pave the way for everybody else. So this is a perfect example of that and how we are fostering that inclusion piece, within the defense team. So really happy to hear everything you had to share. So I'll pass it off to Jody. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what makes you proud? What are you most proud of when it comes to your Sikh identity?
Sure, thank you. So without having a visual way of being identifiable as a Sikh, I want to thank Sarabjot for mentioning and speaking to the visible part. And it's important because one of the things that I'm most proud of is having family members that are Sardars or Sardarnis that wear their turban and with pride and real reverence to the stature that it brings, and the stature, as Sarabjot said so beautifully, of equality. And so I think the overall essence of what Sikhism is about is what makes me honestly most proud. I have a something I want to read out, but just before I do, the other piece that I'm very proud of is seva. And seva is to be of service. And it is something that happens in the Punjabi culture and in the Sikh community as part of our way of being, period. And so, the idea of how you can be of service, knowing that, again, it is part of our identity to show up in that way, makes me really proud. I wanted to read something out as I continue to educate myself. And it's a scripture or an idea around our first Guru, Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And he's quoted as saying, "What can humble Nanak say when all humans have been made equal?" And Guru Nanak Dev Ji, in my eyes and in my view, is very similar to the more current social justice leaders like Dr. King, with the idea of trying to abolish what makes us different with the idea of embracing it. And so to know that ancestors of mine teachers of mine, such as Guru Nanak Dev Ji, hundreds of years ago, were speaking that truth, to me is something to be really proud of and is what motivates me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all three of you for sharing everything that makes you proud of your identity. So the next question is for Iman. What does Sikh Heritage Month mean to you?
Thanks, Amit. So for me, Sikh Heritage Month is really a celebration of all the contributions that the Sikh community has made to Canada, whether that's in politics, art, business, sports, or volunteerism. And I'll just give you a really quick overview. So the first Sikhs actually came to Canada in 1897. Early on, Sikhs did face a lot of hostility and discrimination. One example is the Komagata Maru incident in 1914, in which hundreds of passengers from India, which were mostly Sikh, were denied entry into BC. And the Canadian government actually apologized for this discriminatory incident in 2016. Since then, Canada has become home to over 500,000 Sikhs. And in 2019, 19 Sikhs were voted into the Canadian House of Commons, including 4 ministers of Sikh origin, which is more than any other country in the world, including India. Punjabi, which is the language spoken by Sikhs, is now the 3rd most spoken language in Parliament after English and French. And that's something that I can personally attest to because I used to work as a page in the House of Commons and I would hear Punjabi being spoken all the time on Parliament Hill. We've also had a Sikh premier, a head of a national political party, athletes representing Canada at the Olympics, and even celebrities on TV, like on Dragon's Den, for example. So for me, this is a time to celebrate these accomplishments. On a personal level, it's also a chance for me to reflect on the journey of my own family. So as I mentioned at the beginning, my grandparents came here in the 70s. And they lived in Richmond, British Columbia, which was mainly a white community at the time. And my grandfather has shared stories with me about people, saying racial slurs to him, spitting at him. He had a very difficult time finding employment because he wore a turban, and ultimately he did decide to remove it and to cut his hair. Not to say that it was all negative, and he's a very, very proud Canadian and, never regretted coming here. But looking at myself now, I've never faced that kind of racism or had any conflict within me about my identity as a Sikh and as a Canadian. And growing up, I remember my grandfather, he would always tell me and my brother to never be scared of white people. And we would laugh because we thought it was so funny. Why would we be scared of white people? But as I grew up and he shared more stories with me, I realized that his reality and his experience is very different from my reality. So I think, that this story just shows how far we have come as Sikhs, but also as a country. And so I think it's a time for us to celebrate that, but also think about what more we can do to make our country even more inclusive.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Iman. It just goes to show how small steps do really lead to big change, right? It's gradual, but you're a product of that change. You see it. So that's great. Thank you for sharing. The next question will be for Jody. How has your identity as a first or second generation Sikh Canadian shaped your experiences living in diasporic immigrant communities?
Thank you for the question. So I'm a first generation Punjabi Sikh human, and I find it a really complicated question, to be honest with you. As I spoke earlier about the fact that I don't identify visibly as a Sikh, but I grew up. That's my culture. It's my religion, as is Punjabi. And so growing up, in British Columbia, let alone anywhere else, and I say that because there is a very large population of Punjabi Sikh individuals in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland. But growing up in the 1970s, early 80s, I did face racism. And I was the lighter brown, but I was also the sister or the cousin of someone who wore a golf ball. And I was ashamed to wear a Punjabi suit on Multicultural Day because people would make fun of me because it was really bright. And I remember being worried about going to my Bibi's house or my Papaji's house, so my grandparents, because if they're going to be cooking, I'm going to smell. And so growing up, as much as I wanted to embrace and celebrate, which we did in our homes and in our communities, at reception parties, at the Gurdwara, I didn't necessarily feel that in British Columbia or in Canada. And fast forward into being in the public service, it's only of late that I see a true and what I would say proper embracing and understanding of what we mean by inclusion and diversity. Gone are the days, I feel like, in terms of the way to bring diversity is to have a potluck. Not to say that people don't like samosas, they do. But at the end of the day, I feel like I'm coming more into myself as a public servant without fear, so I can speak my truth as a Sikh and as a Punjabi person. And I didn't feel that in early on in my career. And I'm talking like early on, you know, I've been with the feds for 18 years. So 2001, 2002, when I started, these kinds of conversations weren't taking place. And my lived experience was one of feeling like I needed to fit in. And, you know, when I think about language in particular, I really struggle to this day. I am bilingual in English and in Punjabi. And yet our country and our charter speaks to two colonized languages as being bilingual. And I struggle with those kinds of things. And so my lived experience is both one of pride and celebration, similar to what Iman spoke about in terms of how we recognize, how we celebrate. But it is also one, and I say this hesitantly and almost naively, it's one where I have faced racism and have felt like not wanting to be in my own skin. And again, I say that as someone who doesn't look Sikh. But in the eyes of those that aren't in the despair in the framing of different color, I was still a brown woman. And so my lived experiences, because of my intersectionality, was harder. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody, for your vulnerability and honesty and courage. I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s in British Columbia as well. And a lot of the things that you mentioned were also true for me as well. And especially that internal struggle that you feel where you're feeling like you kind of live two separate lives in the public and then what you have within your own community. So I can really relate to that. And I totally agree that we've come a long way and only now are we really learning to take up space and show up as our full authentic selves everywhere. So thank you so much. So the next question is for Captain Anand. What does being Sikh mean to you and how have Sikh philosophy and values impacted your life experiences?
That's a very deep, thoughtful question. Thanks. I would say the Sikh way of life is, you know, it's simple. You work hard to earn an honest living. You share what you have. This is where that community service comes in, and you remember God, or the universal God. You pray to them. You remember them. That there is a higher being above you, always watching. So our gurus or our teachers, they taught us to be fair, respect everyone with dignity, and respect their religions and their beliefs, right? So being a Sikh, I practice that philosophy, those values on a daily basis. One of the main reasons, so I'm wearing the uniform, so I'll take a Canadian Forces example here. One of the main reasons I enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces was not only to embrace the Sikh warrior culture, like Iman mentioned, you know, we participated in the world wars when she was speaking earlier. So not only to embrace that warrior culture, but also to live and breathe the concept of duty before self and service to the community, which is what Jody mentioned. It's called SEVA, right? And now that I'm in the Canadian Armed Forces, I get to embrace that. I get to embrace the diversity we have among our organizations, among the soldiers. I get to welcome and learn about soldiers and public servants of different backgrounds, races, and educate myself and I learn something new every day. So I'm really blessed about that. Having been deployed to Romania with the Air Force, so Royal Canadian Air Force, as part of Operation Reassurance, that was a dream come true. But again, I got to practice that Sikh philosophy, but now at an international level, where again, duty before self. We were there on an air policing mission for the NATO airspace, and then service to the community, where we sponsored a local orphanage to help improve their community of life. So domestically, internationally, no matter what my job was, I was living, breathing these Sikh values and Sikh philosophy and implementing them as part of my daily life. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarabjot. That was an amazing answer. I love those parallels that you drew between work and Sikhism. It's great, and you can see how they go hand in hand. So I think you being a member of the forces is just it suits you. It's good. The next question is for Iman. So how has your Sikh heritage contributed to your career and your experience in the public service?
Thanks. So I think there are a lot of parallels between Sikh philosophy and the values of the public service. You know, we've talked about serving others, and ultimately what we're doing as public servants is serving Canadians. I spoke earlier about the fearless mindset, and one of the core values of a public servant is speaking truth to power and providing that fearless advice and loyal implementation. And then lastly, I think if we talk about kind of the Sikh archetype, it is kind of that courageous leader. And as public servants, we really are taking a leadership role in shaping the future of Canada. So I think if you break it down that way, it's not a surprise that you see so many Sikhs gravitating towards careers in politics or in public service. And that's kind of the case for me as well. Those values of serving Canadians and, you know, shaping our country really did draw me to this path, this line of work. In terms of my experiences as a public servant, I think I'm very fortunate that they have been positive. And I recognize that that does come from a lot of people before me that are more senior than me that have paved the way. And those are both BIPOC people and non-BIPOC people that have worked to combat systemic racism. And at finance, when I look around at the other young public servants, we are very diverse. You know, I have friends with Chinese, Korean, Indian, Caribbean heritage. And I do know that it didn't used to be like that. That's not to say that isn't more work to be done. Just looking at finance as an example, we've discussed at our anti-racism committee that we don't have sufficient Indigenous representation. So, I look forward to that day, and I would love to have, more young Indigenous public servant colleagues and friends. So I think, we are headed in a positive direction, though. I see a lot of change happening, and racism, anti-racism really being put forward as a priority. So I feel very optimistic about the future.
Yeah, thanks, Iman. I love the connection that you made between some of the values that you have as a Sikh and how those translate to a career in the public service. And even just on a personal note, you and I met through the Anti-Racism Committee at Finance last year because both of us wanted to share the contributions of our community within the department at large. And here we are today on an even larger stage. So now, the next question is for Jody. Please tell us about your lived experience as a Sikh and Punjabi woman and your most significant learnings in honoring your identity and living your life's purpose.
Thank you. So So in 2014, I promise this won't be long, and if I do go long, feel free to cut me off. So I mentioned intersectionality, and all of us shared our layers, and I bring that up because although yes, I identify as a Sikh woman, as a Punjabi woman, for me as a public servant, my worlds collided. And in 2014, it was when I was putting my son to bed after work, after coming downtown Vancouver, 3-hour commute, and wanting to be with him, reading a story to him, and in my brain, asking him to go to sleep, like willing him, go to bed, go to bed, go to bed, because I was so frigging tired. In that moment in 2014, and this is after I had 2 children now, I was brought up with this idea that anything's possible, and that my parents, came here as immigrants for a better life. And I was living and practicing being Punjabi and being Sikh, but also living in a Canadian society that was looking for, that was requiring me to succeed and vertical growth. And a lot of that comes with being a public servant, but also in any sector. Your career means how high you climb the ladder. And in 2014, I had realized that as good of a Punjabi girl that I was, and I didn't mess around with boys. I married a Punjabi boy. He was Sikh. He used the right caste. I got educated. I'm now married. I got 2 kids. I'm doing everything. I've checked all the boxes. But in 2014, in that moment, I literally felt like I was a stranger in my own life, like a life that I built. Like it was really weird. And the learning that came from that was how to reclaim myself and consider what is my life purpose outside of what it means in terms of gains, i.e., I never want to be an executive ever in the public service. And yet, I wasn't brainwashed, but becoming a public servant and career progression means when you're going to be an EX. I mean, I had my own dad say to me often, "But," which means dear in Punjabi, "But when are you going to be a director? Kadon tu director banna hai?" And I would say, "Well, soon, Dad, soon. I'll make it. I'll make you proud." And that's not my life purpose. And so that moment in 2014 that led me to taking a downgrade from a position that I really fought for, so that I could work from home full time. So I've been working from home way before the pandemic, brought me to what my true identity and life purpose is, but in a way that was not easy because I was going against the norm. Like ego and expectation was EX, that's how you're going to live your life purpose. You're going to be a director, you're going to change the world. And so to take a downgrade so I could be with my children more often and having systemic barriers that prevented that from happening, because they do and did, was really hard, but one that has made me stronger. And so that warrior blood that pulses through my veins was elevated in 2014 for me in terms of identity and life purpose. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jody, and being so vulnerable and telling us your truth. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure our audience members can relate as well. I'll pass the baton to Captain Anand. That's the next question for you. We're going to kind of quickly go through some of these questions because I can see that we have a lot of questions coming through the chat feature. So the audience is really curious to know more details about you and Sikhism. So Captain Anand, how has your experience been in the Canadian Armed Forces from a diversity and inclusion lens?
Good question. So honestly, my experience has been fantastic. It's plain and simple. So I mentioned in my introduction that I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Advisor to my DG, Director General, Brigadier General Rodgers. Just that fact shows that the institution, the organization is taking the subject seriously, right? There's a willingness of the senior leadership to adapt to the new world that we live in now, where the societal norms are changing drastically, quickly, and they're different than what they used to be, right? But no organization is perfect. We all know there's always room for improvement, but in order to kind of improve that culture, people that want to see the change must act. And that's usually the analogy I always give. I'm always the first one to raise my hand saying, I see a deficiency, let me come up with a solution and let me take charge to implement it. So I'll give you an example. I know I look different, right? So I'm wearing a turban compared to my fellow soldiers where they're usually wearing berets. If I were to count the number of turban wearing Sikh soldiers within the Canadian Armed Forces, that's both officers and non-commissioned members, regular force and reserve, the part-time, there's probably 50 to 60 of us, right? In a forces that's like 160,000 strong and above, there's only 50 to 60 of us. So that warrior culture that a lot of the panelists have been mentioning of Sikhs isn't necessarily translating in the recruitment numbers or the recruitment strengths of the Canadian forces. So there's definitely work needed there from a diversity perspective. Now the inclusion piece that people usually forget about, Canadian Armed Forces is actually moving in the right direction for that. So I mentioned in the intro again, we were helping develop gas mask extensions to accommodate beards, turbans, hijabs, etc. So currently, if I deploy on an operation where there's a threat from the enemy to use gas against us or the local population, whatever the mission set is, well, Sikh soldiers that are serving Canada, we won't get a proper seal and the gas would actually leak in, right? And then we'd be deemed useless pretty much. This is because the gas masks that we have require you to have a clean shaved face. That's the equipment that we have in the forces right now. So the choice then becomes, do I shave my beard and sacrifice my religious beliefs to serve Canada? Or do I die in operations because of my religious beliefs? And it's not a win-win situation both ways for me, right? So luckily for us, DRDC kind of took on that challenge with the previous Minister of National Defense, Honorable Harjit Sajjan. And the scientists are trialing these gas mask extensions with myself and my fellow Sikh soldiers, those 50 and 60 that I was telling you about across Canada. And just that fact that they recognize there's a need, even though we're such a small number, and they are willing to act on that, shows that the organization and the institution is trying to become more inclusive and is definitely going in the right direction. So that's what I would say is my perspective on diversity and inclusion in Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Captain Anand. I think you did a really eloquent job in kind of explaining how far we've come, yet how much work there is still to be done. Thank you. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to Iman. How does your Sikh heritage intersect with your sense of belonging and identity as a Canadian? Over to you.
Thanks. So I do find it difficult to really delineate between my Sikh identity and my Canadian identity. I almost feel that being Sikh is a part of my Canadianness. And what I mean by that is that growing up, I was taught that multiculturalism and diversity is a core part of what it means to be Canadian. I remember when I was around 9 or 10, that's kind of when kids at school start realizing that we all look a little different. And people started asking me, what I was or where I was from. And my parents encouraged me to ask the question back because, they said everyone besides the Indigenous peoples came from somewhere. So the thing is, now that I'm older, that's actually the part of my identity that I'm struggling with, because coming from an immigrant family, I've been brought up with this notion of Canada being a country of immigrants. And it wasn't until university when I started studying Canadian history and immigration that I really realized that, this country of immigrant narrative is not really accurate. And it does, in fact, cover up a pretty dark colonial past. And last Canada Day, I went to Parliament Hill for the Indigenous March, and there was an Indigenous speaker who said that, we recognize that this is your home now, but you have to recognize that it was our home first. And that really resonated with me and made me think that, as descendants of immigrants or even new immigrants that are coming here, we might need to rethink the story that we tell ourselves about Canada and what it means to be Canadian, and take on a more active responsibility for advancing truth and reconciliation.
Thank you, Iman, for that detailed answer. You spoke a lot of truth there, and I think we all have a lot of learning to do and unlearning to do. So it's a continuous pattern, and I think we all need to kind of raise the awareness around that and ensure that we do our due diligence, you know, as Canadians living on this on this land. Thank you again for sharing. The next question would be for Jody. So the practices of Sikh faith can be different amongst those that celebrate it. Would you like to tell us about how you interpret it in your life?
Sure. So I have a three-part answer. The first is I often do this after meetings, putting my hands together. And growing up, and in particular in the Gurdwara, it was there was a chant that came with that, and it would start with Jo Bole Sone Nahal, Sat Sri Akal. And it's a war cry initially gifted to us by our 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. And it's translated now into our day-to-day, how we say hello and goodbye to people. What I love about the overall meaning behind Sat Sri Akal is the oneness that our scripture teaches us in terms of humanity, but all sentient living beings. And the idea around there's something higher, whether it's God, whether it's an energy, however you want to see it, that Sat Sri Akal is the acknowledgement that there's something beyond us, but a way to recognize it at the same time. So when I say Sat Sri Akal, for me, there is a connection to a higher being, but as well as an equality that I believe in. And there's I do it with real reverence and respect. The second is saying Waheguru, which means God. And in our Holy Scripture, when we speak and then we say Waheguru, I remember growing up with my mom saying, whenever you're feeling upset or worried or scared, or if you're just wanting to do a mantra, just say Waheguru over and over again. And I do that regularly because it brings me peace. And then the third piece is, again, in reference to Guru Nanak Dev Ji and his will and desire and teachings that all went to the idea of true equality and equity. And I find that I didn't realize it, but I'm in human resources. I'm a social justice advocate, and I'm really looking for humanity in our workplaces. I said that in my intro. And the fact that my ancestors or our gurus, that's what they were about. I take it as a call to action in the work that I do now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. I think that as a people, we carry our history with us, and we carry all of those values that have been passed down to us throughout the generations. And even though we may express them in different ways, in unique ways. So the next question is for Captain Anand. So you've shared a little bit about your experiences in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about Sikh military history and why Sikhs are known for their warrior culture.
Absolutely. So going back Sikhism was founded, 5 centuries ago. So Sikhism is a religion founded on peace, but it's forged by self-defense, resilience, and defiance, right? So the reputation of Sikhs as warriors is known throughout the world. So the sixth guru, Guru Har Gobind, he was one of the 10 gurus. He started to militarize Sikhs so that they could, fight against oppression or resist it when it showed up. So then fast forward a few years, then there was the Order of the Khalsa, which was initiated by Guru Gobind Singh, which is our 10th guru. So earlier it was the 6th guru, and now it's the 10th, who was the last in the line of our 10 gurus. He transformed the Sikh faith, to incorporate a military strain, formalizing the Sikhs into the Khalsa, or this fraternity of the pure. And then again, fast forward a few years. So the warrior culture really started during the time of our gurus when we were fighting oppression. And then the British Empire took over, and the Sikhs quickly gained this reputation of one of the world's bravest armies as part of the British India Army. So to the point, this is a really interesting fact, to the point where the first Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald, wrote a letter to England, and he stated, war will come someday between England and the United States, and India can do us a yeoman's service by sending us an army of Sikhs. That blows my mind. Back in 1867, someone wrote that in a letter. You know, here we are sitting in Canada, participating in this wonderful AMA session, and the very first Prime Minister requested an army of Sikhs to defend Canada back in 1867. That's mind-boggling. It's mind-blowing. You know, kudos to our ancestors for showing such bravery. So this goes to show Sikhs were indeed known for that warrior culture and bravery. And of course, like Iman mentioned, we've participated in many World War I and World War II with the British Empire, you know, fought all over the world. And we were actually recognized or known as the Lions of the Great War because of that bravery. And Sikhs even served in the Canadian Army. There was actually 10 Sikh soldiers back in World War I. And there's actually the only known gravesite of a Sikh soldier from World War I in Kitchener-Waterloo area. So every Remembrance Day, just a week prior, I actually take a personal visit to, you know, honor the Private Buckham Singh, that's his grave over there, and show respect and pay my dues, because he paved the path for me and my fellow Sikh soldiers here in Canada. And that's the warrior culture of Sikhs.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Captain Anand. You know, we have a ton of questions. On a plusieurs de questions dans le chat ici. Alors, maybe I'll pick one, and then Amneet, I'll flip it to you, and then you can pick the other one. I'll take the one that, you know, I've also come across this question. I mean, I'm not of, I don't participate in the Sikh faith, but I do have a lot of Punjabi Sikh friends, and I've always grown up saying it's Sikh. But one of the questions is, je l'ai entendu prononcer Sikh ou Sikh. Quelle est la prononciation préférée? S'agit-il d'une différence régionale? So I have heard it pronounced Sikh and Sikh. What is the preferred pronunciation? I'll throw it back to anybody, any one of the panelists.
I could take it for sure. So it's actually Sikh, but you know how the world works. We immigrate to a Western country and we Westernize our root language just to fit in, and that's why the Western culture calls it Sikh. And then we give in and we say, oh, that's embarrassing. They're pronouncing the original name wrong, so we're gonna call it Sikh as well. Mm-hmm. The preferred way is Sikh. It's just been Westernized. So it actually means a lot to us if you say it the original way, which is Sikh.
Thank you for the explanation. And okay, so I'm going to pick another question from the ones that have come in, and I'll open this up to whoever wants to answer it. What aspect of Sikh culture do you feel that, if adopted broadly across Canada, would have a strong impact, positive impact on our society?
I can try first. I'll say the selflessness, like true selflessness as it relates to seva. So the idea of doing something truly like that altruistic way of being. I think if folks could, and I still work on that too, because humans are complex and we've got egos, we've got needs, we've got wants. But I think if that piece and that teaching could be embodied truly wholly, I think that not just Canada, but the whole world would be a better place.
Neith, I'm going to ask you to take over at this point because I'm having some technical issues with my camera. So go for it.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Jody. Okay, let's look at another question. If you aren't born into a Sikh family and are not of Punjabi heritage, are you able to convert to Sikhism? Do you share your faith openly with others?
Yep.
The answer is yes. So we don't, and I'll speak to this a bit, and you guys feel free to jump in. We obviously don't force the religion upon someone. We don't force the faith on someone. But if someone finds that they're in synchronicity with the religion, the practices, the beliefs, the values, then go for it. You know, become a Sikh, which is an lifelong student. You're a lifelong learner. Take the practices, believe in them, implement them in your daily life, and you call yourself a Sikh. That's my 2 cents on the issue, but we welcome. And there's actually, in the New Mexico area, there's actually a lot of white converts where they were based out of New Mexico area. They were into the yoga scene, but they converted into Sikhism. And they are actually much more rigid and much more practicing than the ones that are actually born in the religion. It's embarrassing to say, but it's the reality. So you don't have to be born into a religion. You can practice and adapt it at a later stage in your life, for sure.
I would just add, yeah, I mean, there's a Sikh community, like white Sikhs, across Canada. And a fun little tidbit was my brother actually did an exchange in Chile in South America, and he volunteered with a local Sikh community there who were Chilean, and they were doing what Jody was talking about, like a langar. They were serving meals to homeless people in the city. So yeah, you find Sikhs from all different communities across the world, really.
I just wanted to add too, I sometimes think that Sikhism is somewhat akin to Buddhism. And although Buddhism isn't necessarily considered a religion, more of a philosophy, or depending on who you talk to, Sikhism is a religion. But the idea of it being a welcoming and a choice versus an obligation is something that I think is an important piece. So even the language of, can you convert? When Sarabjot was speaking, it was more like, if you want to try it and you think, the values and the teachings resonate with you, go for it. And speaking to the idea around the paradox that exists between Punjabi culture and Sikh culture, there is a paradox when it comes to things like caste. The caste system was kept in our Punjabi culture, but yet when you look at the readings and the Holy Scripture, we're all equal. And so that's an important piece to recognize in terms of, well, who can be Sikh? Well, and anyone. And even just to the idea of the word Sikh versus Sikh, isn't it like whatever generation now uses the word that's Sikh, like that's cool? I'm the 80s, right? So I use the word awesome. I remember thinking, well, if you can use the word Sikh and that means a cool thing, what's wrong with us taking it back and saying that that's the way we pronounce our religion? Anyhow, I digress.
Thank you. And yeah, I think what's one of the most beautiful things about Sikhism is that we welcome everyone to come and learn from us and decide for yourselves if it's something that you want to explore. It's really about your personal journey. Okay, so let's go on to the next question. So I'm going to direct this one for you, Jody. Are you or how are you passing Sikh traditions onto your children?
That's a great question. Well, outside of the pandemic, going to the Gurdwara is something that, as a means to live and breathe. What that's like is first and foremost something that we were doing and still continue to do. If I take my dad's approach, and in growing up, we had a jot in our home, which is a candle, a made candle out of cotton soaked in butter that then shines like forever. It's timeless. And so I've shared and used the one that existed, the pieces of it, and shown my children that growing up. I've taught them certain mulmatars, so the actual certain phrases in our Holy Scripture, so that they can sort of, and I share it with them, saying to them, "This is what I was taught by my mom." And then I'll translate it for them. So if I'll say things like "Aaj such, Jugad such, Habi such, Nanak Hosi be such," I'll say it in Punjabi and then I'll say it in English so that they're understanding what that looks like and how it fits in terms of the way that we live and breathe. They're in Punjabi school, which it was hard fought to find something in South Surrey where they teach Punjabi, but we have a teacher that's doing it. And I've just recently reached out to see if I can actually participate in the lessons, but do it on the cultural side. My kids will be there and they'll be embarrassed, but I don't give a shit. They're gonna have to put up with me if that happens. So that's what I'm doing.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Seema.
No.
I'll let you pick some questions.
Okay, perfect. Now that my camera's working. Okay, so this is an interesting question, and I think I'll throw it to Iman. So the question is, I'm an EDI event planner for my branch, facing pushback from ADMO about acknowledging religious observances. Any advice? I'll just read it out in French. Je suis un planificateur d'événements de EDI pour ma branche et je dois faire face à la réticence de l'ADMO concernant la reconnaissance des observances religieuses. Avez-vous des conseils pour moi?
Sure. Yeah, we kind of faced a little bit of that in finance, because it was fairly new just last year that we wanted to kind of raise more awareness about various cultural months or celebrations. And so I think initially there's a little bit of hesitancy on, well, if we recognize one, then we have to recognize them all, and it's a lot of work and that kind of thing. But like Sikh Heritage Month, it's recognized. I think it's federally, but definitely in Ontario, it is like it's recognized in law. So these aren't really controversial things. So like that's the argument that we made. And yeah, I would just say, I mean, the Department of Canadian Heritage, they do a whole celebration of all the various cultural, like whether it's Black History Month, Sikh Heritage Month, the Prime Minister is speaking on these events, various ministers. So, I would say if anyone has kind of hesitancy, it's a little bit outdated at this point. I think it's widely accepted. So I would say just push back and give them the example of finance and how much we've been celebrating, not just the Heritage Month, but all kinds of various celebrations.
Can I just add something to that? I would love to ask, well, where is the hesitancy coming from? I would throw it back. And if need be, as Iman has said, looking to mandates of certain departments and that it's happening. So you're maybe out of date. And if need be, go to the law, and pull from human rights legislation, pull from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, pull from the Clerk of the Privy Council edict that was given after George Floyd was murdered, and speaking to the supporting and looking at hiring and elevating Black public servants and BIPOC in general public servants. And that the idea of if this is too hard or too much work is, as Mon says very beautifully, outdated, and just get with it at this point. I mean, really. Sorry.
Great. So we have time for a couple more questions. Okay, so we kind of touched on this one already, but I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to reflect on this. What has been one of the biggest challenges that you've faced as a Sikh person in the federal public service? And I guess on the flip side as well, what can managers do to support their Sikh employees?
I could take a stab at this, not from a public service perspective, but we work hand in hand. In Ottawa, my department has public servants and military soldiers working together. So I think the answer is going to be similar. But what can you do? So usually what I do, and this is a personal thing that I do. So I joined the forces in 2011. After all the training, I was in Bagotville, Quebec. Then I was posted to Kingston, Ontario, CFB Trenton, Ontario, and now based out of Ottawa. So that's like 4 big postings I've done, from getting untrained to fully qualified and doing my job in the forces. But each of those 4 locations, every time I would walk in, like I mentioned, there's 50 or 60 of us in the entire forces wearing turbans. I would get eyes looking at me weird. What's he wearing on his head? And that happens to a lot of the Sikhs, whether that's outside the military, outside the public service, or within the public service. So we know that exists. What I personally do is I take the opportunity, I seize the moment, and I usually, every posting I've done, get the entire department together and I do a 15-minute PowerPoint presentation on what is a Sikh, right? Sikh military history, because I'm in the forces, and a couple of humorous photos of me wearing fancy Halloween costumes. Just to kind of open that door and say, hey, look, I'm an open book. I know I look different, but at the human level, we're all equal, right? Rank aside, level aside, whether you're a manager, subordinate, captain, or a major, it doesn't matter. Talk to me like a human. If you have any questions, please approach me. And I would be more than happy to educate you. And that's me personally, because I've chosen since RMC that journey to diversity and inclusion, because there was no headdress standard, and I've kind of made it my goal to educate everyone from here onwards. That's me personally. At the manager level, you can do that, right? You have that honest conversation with your Sikh subordinate and you let them know, hey, let me know if you face any issues. Let me know how I can assist you. Please educate me on your cultural, religious beliefs and requirements. Do you need certain days off? Do you celebrate on a specific day? Educate me and let me help you. That's what you can do as a manager, rather than just looking at them weirdly, because I get a lot of eyes every posting I go to, and I just seize that opportunity and I make it. And then after that, you become that guy, right? You become that, oh, that's a Sikh officer. He's pretty cool dude. If you ever have a question, feel free to reach out to him and he'd be more than happy to answer. So that's the journey I've taken. Everyone's different. Not everyone's an extrovert or a social butterfly. I'm lucky in that manner, but those are my 2 cents.
I could jump in just in terms of the manager. I think I've been really lucky. My direct manager and other managers that I work with, I find them to be really open with sharing struggles that maybe they've gone through, whether that's racism, it could be mental health, it could be all kinds of experiences. And I think when management is open and vulnerable like that, it also encourages employees to come forward and say, this incident happened to me, and that you have someone there who's going to listen to you and support you, because that behavior has been modeled for you as well. So I think that would definitely help. It's helped me, because I feel very comfortable going to my management and sharing with them, if anything were to happen.
I'll just quickly add, I shared my story in that in one of the questions around the challenge, but in terms of management, one of the things that I'm finding myself doing a lot more over the years is just telling it like it is, in my lens, respectfully and professionally. And I have some clout because I've got 2 degrees and I've been in HR for many years, and so I have a bit of street cred. But the way that I look at the challenges that I have faced, and not maybe directly with the managers that I've worked with, they have been phenomenal human beings that have supported me. I still see a lot of injustice in the public service, and my approach has been giving it to them straight. Managers, and in particular, I say managers and not leaders, because I struggle with even that terminology. At the end of the day, we're looking at a word that I found called humanship. And that when you're in a position of power, whether that be staffing delegation or financial delegation, please know why you're in that position. And the hope is you're in it not for yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to move on to our final question. We're running out of time. I wish we had more time because we have a lot of great questions that have come in from the audience, but we'll have to wrap up soon. So the last question I wanted to ask for everyone is, what is the one message that you would like to leave with us today? Quel message voulez-vous que nous retenions à la suite de cette discussion? Iman, we'll start with you.
OK. Alors, cet exercice m'a vraiment ouvert les yeux sur mon propre identité et héritage parce que j'ai dû faire beaucoup de réflexions pour répondre aux questions. Alors, je vais partager avec vous ce que j'ai appris de ce processus. So, I would say what I really took away from this is a sense of pride in how far we've come as a country, but also a sense that there's a lot more work to be done to make Canada more inclusive. But I actually feel optimistic because, you know, looking at the Sikh experience from the kind of the facts that I shared with you and the history of my own family, I can see that it's definitely possible. So j'espère donc que vous repartirez avec ce même sentiment de fierté et un peu de motivation pour travailler ensemble sur le travail qui reste.
Thank you, Man. And Jody, we'll move to you next. What's the one message that you would like to leave with us today?
The ideas around ancestral trauma and ancestral wisdom, and this idea of victim mentality versus warrior mentality. And one way that I've been dancing in those two spaces is through creating a sankalpa, or what's called intentions. And it's ones that is I am versus I want. And that for me has been very powerful in terms of reconnecting with my roots. One of my sankalpas is worded with the idea of I embrace my ancestral wisdom. And it's empowering. And so that would be the message that I would love to leave with folks is it's not easy to do, but if you're able to get to a place like that where you've connected both and driving forward, it can feel very fulfilling.
Thank you, Jody. And last but not least, over to Captain Anand. What is the one message that you would like to leave with us today?
Be the change you wish to see. So I would say we live in such an amazing and diverse nation, but no place is perfect, like I mentioned earlier. The journey of diversity and inclusion isn't a checklist, but it's an ever-growing process, right? There's always room for improvement. And with that, if you think there is change required in helping make your organization or society or even the nation more inclusive, well, be that change you wish to see. Take charge, come up with a solution, and implement it. Thanks.
Thank you. Very powerful words. So thank you so much to all three of you, Jody, Iman, and Captain Anand, for taking the time to share your layers and your experiences with us as we celebrate Sikh Heritage Month. Thank you for being both vulnerable and courageous, and for offering your personal experiences as touch points for learning and connection and growth and change. Thank you to all the organizers for inviting me and all the panelists here today and for giving an opportunity to others to reflect and to learn. These conversations are critical to developing understanding and compassion and empathy towards others. And thank you all to our attendees. Your involvement is a key component in fostering diversity and inclusion throughout the Government of Canada. One last thing I'd like to share is that we are, in the spirit of Sikh Heritage Month, we are going to be launching a Sikh Public Servants Network, which is very grassroots level. And this is going to provide us with the space to meet with each other and connect with each other. So if you are interested in joining or would like more information, please check out the chat. Now over to you, Seema.
Thank you so much. I just want to personally say thank you to Jody, Iman, and Captain Anand for sharing your stories with us today, and Amneet for being a wonderful co-host. You know, it was really, it was interesting to hear all of these different stories and different lived experiences. And as a Bangladeshi Canadian, you know, there are a lot of similarities in what you said today. So a lot of it resonated with me too. So we have a lot of the similar shared experiences. I would like to challenge everyone who attended today to go back and work with their teams and communities on the AMA challenge. And when doing this, think about the how you can broaden your knowledge of the Sikh community and what can be done to continue to push the boundaries of inclusiveness and safe spaces for all. This is an area of growth we as an AMA team will work on to achieve as we move forward. We would also like to thank the team who provided support in the planning of this event. Merci beaucoup. I think we can all agree, l'inclusion n'est pas un programme, c'est un état d'esprit. It is the way we treat others and the way they treat ourselves. Inclusion is the opportunity to learn together from one another, and we do it because it's just the right thing to do. So for more information, and if you want to give us some feedback, there's a link for a feedback survey in the chat. So if you have time, to our audience members, please take a moment and share your thoughts with us today, including your ideas for upcoming events. And if you have ideas for guest speakers, that would be great. Our next Ask Me Anything is on May 18th, and we will be talking about Asian heritage at that time. So thank you again for joining us today. We will see you again soon. Bye, everyone. Thank you.